The Premier League Hall of Fame launched in 2021, with a fresh set of inductees welcomed into the club in 2022, 2023 and 2024. And guess what? Literally no one cares. No, really, the Premier League put a fair amount of time and resources into launching what was supposed to be a prestigious and coveted marketing tool, but outside of a few tweets when the latest set of inductees are announced, you hardly ever see anyone talk about it. I never really see fans of rival clubs argue about who should or shouldn't be in the Premier League Hall of Fame, boast that their club's player made the cut while someone else's didn't, or bring it up as evidence in arguments about whether one player was better than another. So it has been a total flop. I think maybe the concept of a Hall of Fame seems a little bit too Americanized to some people, invoking ideas of the basketball or pro football Halls of Fame, which are much more pronounced in American sporting culture. The excitement surrounding the launch was somewhat dampened by Ryan Giggs, who was probably the first name on the list of inductees, being arrested on suspicion of 2 counts of assault against his ex-girlfriend and her sister in 2020, forcing the record 13-time Premier League title winner to be overlooked, and, unlike, say, the Italian Football Hall of Fame or Germany's Sports Hall of Fame, which launched to warmer receptions in 2011 and 2006, or even, the English Football Hall of Fame, which is a thing that already existed, the Premier League's Hall of Fame is typically exclusionary, perpetuating the idea that English football, despite being home to the oldest set of codified rules, league, and cup competition anywhere in the world, only actually started in 1992. Or maybe no one would have cared regardless. Well, today I've set myself the task of making the Premier League Hall of Fame a bit more interesting. I know, don't ever say that I'm one to shirk a challenge. There have been 22 Premier League players inducted into the Hall of Fame to date, and I am going to attempt to rank them from worst to best. It should be said, that is not from worst to best in terms of talent or even necessarily achievements, but specifically on their quality and quantity of performances in the Premier League. Steven Gerrard's Champions League heroics, Didier Drogba's unrivaled record in finals, or Thierry Henry's somewhat less impressive record in finals are all irrelevant therefore. I urge you to please keep that in mind. What is great about making a video like this one is that you are guaranteed to infuriate absolutely everyone, no one will agree with you, and at least 2/3 of people will be left thinking that you are a contemptible moron who knows nothing about football owing to at least one decision, but that's all part of the fun. I'd be surprised if anyone got annoyed about the order of Gerrard, Lampard and Scholes, or anything as silly and unimportant as that. Right? I'll try to explain my thinking, and at the end, I will share with you how I would have ordered them if I wanted most people to agree with me and the least hassle in the comments, and if I didn't have so much goddamn honesty, integrity, and conviction in my own beliefs. It is perhaps my greatest weakness. Right, without further ado, who shamefully hasn't been included just yet despite his heroic spell on trial at Manchester United in the mid-2000s, here is how I would rank every Premier League Hall of Fame inductee based upon the quality and quantity of their Premier League appearances from least to most brilliant. 22nd, Vincent Kompany. There are no players who didn't have outstanding Premier League careers in this list, otherwise, they wouldn't have been inducted into the Premier League Hall of Fame. That's sort of the whole idea. Someone has to get us started though, and I'll try to explain why that is Vincent Kompany. Kompany was a brilliant centre-back who straddled the pre- and post-Mansour or Emirati state-owned eras at Manchester City, not only holding his own after the Citizens began spending money like no one else, but consistently being one of their most integral players on their journey from mid-table also-rans to the top 4 and ultimately dominating the English game. What holds Kompany back are his injuries. He only actually made more than 30 Premier League appearances in 3 out of his 11 seasons at the Etihad, and he played fewer than 20 times in each of his last 4 seasons. The fact that I think all of the players ahead of him had slightly superior Premier League careers, and his massive forehead. I'm just kidding. His forehead really had nothing to do with it. If anything, on occasion, it was a benefit. There's not much more to add because there's no one to compare him to as our first inclusion, but Kompany was a quality player and captain and a seminal figure in Man City becoming Premier League powerhouses. 21st, Ian Wright. Vincent Kompany played more Premier League games, despite his injuries, and won more Premier League titles than Ian Wright, but I still feel as though Wright's overall Premier League contribution was marginally greater than the Belgians. A late bloomer, Wright was 21 when he earned his first professional contract at Crystal Palace, he was 25 when he first played top-flight football, and he turned 29 during the same season that the Premier League launched in 1992-93. That last stat, ultimately, is what prevents Wright from coming any higher than 21st. Incredibly prolific, despite his age, Wright scored 113 goals in 213 Premier League games, which is the 6th highest goals per game ratio among those in the Premier League's so-called 100 club, ahead of the likes of Robin van Persie, Michael Owen, and Andy Cole. Wright made 2 PFA Team of the Year inclusions and earned 2 Ballon d'Or nominations during the Premier League era, despite only winning 1 league title, but while he was good value for his 2022 induction, his age when the league was created in an orgy of greed prevents him from troubling the upper echelons of this list. 20th, David Beckham. It is a similar story, in some ways, with David Beckham as it is with Ian Wright. Becks wasn't 29 when the Premier League was formed, should be said, he was 17, but he played his last Premier League game just a week after turning 28, restricting him to 265 Premier League appearances. That is still quite a lot, of course. Beckham basically spent 8 seasons as a star man at Old Trafford, winning 6 Premier League titles, but he lacks the Premier League longevity of fellow Class of 92 alumni like Giggs, Scholes or Neville. If he had that longevity, Beckham would be right up there. He might be considered a celebrity as much as a former footballer these days, who would happily sell his soul for a packet of Walker's crisps, or £125 million from the Qatari state, but he was a world-class footballer. Beckham combined incredible energy, industry, and often underrated physical attributes, with one of the finest right foots on the planet and an unerring eye for a pass, a cross, or a strike from range, all of which combined to make him one of the finest set-piece specialists of all time. Beckham was among the 8 founding inductees of the Premier League Hall of Fame in 2021, perhaps as a late step-in for former teammate Ryan Giggs, or just because of his unrivaled marketing power. Who knows? He is a Premier League legend, but his fallout with Sir Alex and his exit to Real Madrid restricts him to a spot in 20th. 19th, Petr Cech. It is practically impossible to compare goalkeepers to outfield players. It is the most important position on the pitch, arguably, and almost all great teams have great goalkeepers. But by the same token, well, let's just be honest. They're not really footballers, are they? Why are you booing? I'm right. There are only 2 goalkeepers in the Premier League Hall of Fame as things stand, and for the reasons I just outlined, they were among the toughest inductees to rank. Petr Cech played 443 Premier League games for Chelsea and Arsenal, he kept a record 202 clean sheets, and he won a joint record 4 Premier League Golden Gloves. As good as we have seen in the Premier League prior to his skull fracture, when you think of Cech being so integral to Chelsea, conceding just 15 goals throughout the entire 2004-05 season, I simultaneously can't justify putting Cech ahead of the outfield players who feature ahead of him, but I'm also not really sure what more he could have done. It's just a curse of being a goalkeeper, I suppose, and I think the other one in the Premier League Hall of Fame was just slightly superior to him. 18th, Didier Drogba. There are 2 narratives that surround Didier Drogba. One is that he was an unstoppable force of nature, who was unplayable at his best and turned up when it mattered most, and the other one is that he only scored more than 12 league goals in 2 out of his 9 seasons in the Premier League. Both of those things are true, of course, but they don't quite prove what the people making those arguments often seem to think. Or I don't think so, at least. Drogba was a phenomenal big game player, but cup finals and games against Arsenal are not the be-all and end-all. The rest of the season also matters, and Drogba did only have 2 awe-inspiring seasons in front of goal, but one of them was absolutely out of this world. He scored 29 goals in 32 Premier League games, and Drogba did a lot more than just scoring goals. As anyone approaching 30 or beyond will be able to recall, target man may be too strong of a word, but Drogba was perhaps the Premier League's greatest ever focal point up front, and whereas someone like Ian Wright, who featured in 21st, had a better goal-scoring record than him, he made about half as many assists as Drogba in roughly the same number of games. The Ivorian was such a brilliant all-rounder that he often took corners at Chelsea, despite being one of the most dominant players aerially in the league. Meanwhile, Frank Lampard, who often took up more advanced positions than Drogba, wouldn't have scored anywhere near as many goals without him. For his 9 seasons, 100 Premier League goals, and 4 Premier League titles, Drogba cracks the top 20, but can't quite finish above the rock of a defender up next. 17th. Tony Adams. Hampered by the same problem as Ian Wright, namely, the fact that he is quite old, purely in the context of this list I should point out, Tony Adams turned 26 at the beginning of the first Premier League season, and he had already been playing first-team football at Arsenal for 9 whole years by that stage. Nonetheless, Adams, who spent his entire career at Arsenal, didn't retire until 2002, giving him 10 seasons of Premier League football in total, 9 as a regular starter, and 255 Premier League appearances. Arguably the greatest centre-back of the Premier League era, in terms of the pure defensive fundamentals, Adams was a born leader, captaining Arsenal from the age of 21 through to his retirement. He read the game brilliantly, and he was never one to shy away from a challenge. He captained Arsenal to top-flight league titles in 3 different decades, 2 of them during the Premier League era. He made the 1992 to 2002 Premier League Team of the Decade, and if he was born 10 years earlier, he might well have flirted with our top 10. 16th. Ashley Cole. The Premier League's greatest left-back, and the only full-back on either side of the pitch to so far have been inducted into the Premier League Hall of Fame, Ashley Cole was a fast, dynamic and adventurous left-back at Arsenal, where he won 2 Premier League titles, including the Invincible season, before becoming a slightly more conservative, but even more defensively efficient left-back at Chelsea, initially under Jose Mourinho, where he won a 3rd Premier League title. I am always surprised, not always, I suppose, just the first time that I heard it. I'm not a goldfish, but it remains surprising, is the point that I'm trying to convey, that Cole only won 1 league title at Chelsea. In 8 years, between 2006 and 2014, it feels like it should be more, but Cole missed out on Mourinho's first 2 titles and departed just before Jose won a 3rd in 2014-15. He made up for it by winning more FA Cups than any other player in history, though that is, of course, irrelevant to the context of this video. Cole made 385 Premier League appearances, he is the best fullback of the Premier League era, and I think that you could make an argument for putting him as high as about 13th. Ultimately, I couldn't quite justify putting him ahead of the Magician up next. 15th. Dennis Bergkamp. It's easy to make arguments against Dennis Bergkamp, similar to those relating to Didier Drogba, namely that he didn't score that many goals. In 315 Premier League appearances, Bergkamp scored 87 goals, an average of less than a goal every 3.5 games, but to focus on that would be to completely overlook the entire reason why Dennis Bergkamp is a Premier League great. It's not just that he was a supremely creative foil for firstly Ian Wright and then Thierry Henry, or even that he is one of the most elegant and gifted forwards that English football has ever seen. The reality is that Bergkamp's arrival in 1995 was a watershed moment for Arsenal and for the Premier League as a whole. It represented a shift in terms of style, systems, vibe and professionalism from which there would be no turning back. He lifted Arsenal, both on and off the pitch, which is somewhat ironic given his fear of flying, winning 3 Premier League titles and earning a place in the hearts and minds of all English football fans, not just Gunners. Just imagine where he might have ranked if he did score a few more goals. 14th. Petr Schmeichel. The second goalkeeper inducted into the Premier League Hall of Fame, Petr Schmeichel is probably the greatest goalkeeper of the Premier League era, and although, as we have established, goalkeepers aren't really footballers, that probably deserves some recognition. Unlike the goalkeepers in a lot of super teams, certainly Petr Cech in his early years at Chelsea would be a good example, Schmeichel wasn't massively protected at Manchester United. He obviously had very good defenders in front of him, but the Red Devils didn't tend to control games or suffocate their opponents in the 90s, and there was no midfield anchor, which meant that Schmeichel was kept relatively busy and fairly involved in a lot of games. Signed by Alex Ferguson a year before the Premier League's foundation for just £505,000, Schmeichel's value had increased by a multiple of at least 10 by the end of his debut campaign, which concluded with Denmark winning the Euros and Schmeichel playing a starring role. In the Premier League, Schmeichel made 310 appearances, 252 of them at Old Trafford, followed by single seasons at Villa and Man City. He won 5 Premier League titles, and for the best part of a decade, it was often said that he was worth about 10 points a season to Manchester United, compared to the average goalkeeper. Of course, that was in the days before expected goals versus actual goals conceded metrics were officially measured, so we will never know for sure, but he was definitely, and these are my words, quite good. It's just regrettable that he became a shameless shill for FIFA and the Russian and Qatari governments. Shame on you, Peter. 13th, Andy Cole. The Premier League Hall of Fame might be a completely unnecessary failed promotional project. There is no maybe. It is. But I'm glad that Andy Cole was among the 2024 inductees regardless. The only players to have scored more goals during the Premier League era are Alan Shearer, Harry Kane and Wayne Rooney. Meanwhile, the next 3 players below Cole are Sergio Aguero, Frank Lampard and Thierry Henry. That is quite some company to keep, yet, perhaps by virtue of recency bias, a subpar international career, or other reasons, it feels as though Cole is rarely included in conversations with those kinds of names when it comes to Premier League greats. Prior to Erling Haaland's debut campaign at Manchester City, no player had scored more goals than Cole's 34 in a single Premier League campaign, which he managed for Newcastle in the 1993-94 season, prompting a move to Manchester United. Cole forged a famous strike partnership with Dwight Yorke at Old Trafford, where he continued to score goals at an impressive rate, became a much better all-round centre-forward, and won 5 Premier League titles. Cole added to his impressive Premier League tally at Fulham, Man City and Portsmouth, and in my Hall of Fame rankings, he gets the recognition he thoroughly deserves. 12th, John Terry. Well, we are getting into controversial territory, where people are going to start getting mad at me, but in 12th place is a man that many consider to be the greatest centre-back of the Premier League era. An absolute natural, John Terry played with a positional awareness and understanding of the game of the 30-year-old when he first broke through at Chelsea at the age of only 18, and at 20, he captained the club for the very first time. Terry became Chelsea's full-time captain after Marcel Desailly left the club, and he went on to become Chelsea's most successful captain of all time, lifting 5 Premier League titles and 12 other trophies. Terry made 492 Premier League appearances in total, displaying outrageous consistency levels, before receiving a bizarre staged guard of honour from relegation-bound Sunderland in an actual Premier League game. Terry received the joint second most PFA Team of the Year inclusions of any centre-back and the most FIFPro World 11 inclusions. Of Premier League players, that is. Powerful in the air and on the ground, Terry wasn't just a brilliant defender, he also possessed an accurate and effective left foot, and he even chipped in with several vital goals for Chelsea over the years. 11th, Eric Cantona. Eric Cantona was probably the toughest player to rank in this video, or at least the toughest outside of the goalkeepers, who, as we have established, aren't really footballers. On the one hand, I am on a fundamental level attempting to rank the quality and quantity of appearances in the Premier League, and Cantona only made 156 Premier League appearances, which is the fewest of any Premier League Hall of Fame inductee. But on the flip side, no one made a bigger or more lasting impression on the Premier League in as few appearances as King Eric. Despite his reputation as a volatile eccentric, typified by his kung fu kick on a Crystal Palace fan and lengthy suspension, Cantona was actually a consummate professional with a supreme dedication to the sport, and his drive and mentality rubbed off on those around him. Alex Ferguson maintains that Cantona's arrival midway through the inaugural Premier League season was the catalyst for Manchester United winning the Premier League, which was their first title since the 60s, and going on to become the dominant force in English football. Cantona wasn't the most prolific striker that the Premier League has seen. He scored 70 goals in 156 Premier League games, but no one scored more vital goals or provided all-important moments of inspiration when their team needed them most on a more frequent and reliable basis. In 5 seasons at Manchester United, who hadn't won the league since the days of Busby, Best, Charlton and Law, Cantona won 4 Premier League titles. He was the star man in every single one of them. And in the one season that Man United didn't win the Premier League while he was there, in 1994-95, it was not coincidentally the same season which he missed much of due to that aforementioned suspension. 10th, Rio Ferdinand. The positioning of John Terry and Rio Ferdinand is bound to make me unpopular with some people. I'd imagine mostly Chelsea fans, so it's hard to be sure, but probably. Albeit there is only a couple of places between them, so I'll just do my best to try and explain myself. Firstly, I do think that John Terry and Ricardo Carvalho is the best centre-back partnership of the Premier League era, ahead of even Ferdinand and Vidic, and I think that purely defensively, Terry was maybe marginally better than Ferdinand, and I do think that it is quite marginal. But by virtue of being an absolute tool, well, they both are, let's face it, but we see more of Ferdinand. I think some people who were young or not even born at the time don't fully appreciate just how good Rio Ferdinand was. We are talking about a centre-back who broke the British record transfer fee and the world record fee for a defender twice before he'd even turned 24 years old. Physically quick and strong, able to eat up ground with his long legs, especially in his early years, mentally alert, with a focus that intensified over the years, of not letting any goals or even opportunities come down his side, and a technical marvel who could carry and distribute the ball unlike any other English centre-back of his generation, Ferdinand was synonymous with the old cliché of a Rolls-Royce for very good reason. Jamie Carragher is the only centre-back with more Premier League era appearances, and only 4 more. He made 6 PFA Team of the Year inclusions, where no other Premier League centre-back made more than 4, and he won 6 Premier League titles. Taking everything into account, purely on quantity and quality of performances in the division, I think that Ferdinand, as much of a turd as he might be, is the Premier League's greatest centre-back. And yes, we are just going to pretend like that abomination at QPR never happened. 9th, Sergio Aguero. It seems fitting to have a number 9 in 9th place, although of course, it doesn't quite work since Sergio Aguero wore the number 10 shirt in the Premier League for Manchester City. I wasn't about to upend my entire list just to artificially insert someone who actually wore the number 9 shirt into 9th place. Of course not, that would be ridiculous. Aguero is the 3rd most prolific member of the Premier League's 100 club on a goals per game basis, sandwiched between Harry Kane and Mohamed Salah, and the most prolific in terms of goals per minute. The Argentine was hampered rarely by long-term injuries at the Etihad, but persistent niggling short-term setbacks, which prevented him from playing more than 30 Premier League games in most of his seasons in England. Given his rate of output at times, it is only those injuries that prevented Aguero from enjoying multiple 30-goal-plus Premier League seasons. He still scored 184 goals in only 275 Premier League games, putting him 5th in the league's Premier League era scoring charts, but Aguero's legacy is about more than just goals. His arrival, far more so than Robinho's, announced Man City's genuine arrival at the top table of European football. He elevated the club's status and performance levels from the moment that he made his memorable debut, and he obviously scored the all-important injury time winner that secured Man City their first title of the Premier League era. Later, under Pep Guardiola, Aguero adapted his game and became far more complete in a way that few previously felt possible, and I actually think that the 2017-18 season was probably his peak, but his Premier League career as a whole, as one of the greatest strikers that the league has ever seen, secures him a spot in our top 10. 8th, Steven Gerrard. Okay, here come the pitchforks. Allow me to explain, and it's not just because Steven Gerrard wore the number 8 shirt. Steven Gerrard is undoubtedly one of the Premier League's greatest players. I am putting him 8th, not 18th, it's worth noting. And it is noticeable that he made the PFA Team of the Year 8 times, whilst no other player has been included more than 6 times during the Premier League era. That exhibits both Gerrard's freakish consistency levels over more than a decade and the extraordinarily high regard that he was held in by teammates and opponents alike, and for very good reason. Industrious and powerful, Gerrard could tackle, he could win headers, he had a great first touch, a brilliant range of passing, he could strike a set piece, and he scored no lack of goals from open play to boot. Notwithstanding all of that, it is worth noting that some of Gerrard's most iconic moments, which are one of the reasons why he is rightly held in such high regard, came outside of the Premier League, in competitions like the Champions League and the FA Cup, which aren't relevant to this list, and fundamentally, we are talking about very fine margins. I mean, there's just not a great deal to split several players in this list. Gerrard obviously also never won a Premier League title, which it would be remiss of me not to mention, but given the stated criteria, that really isn't a huge black mark against him. 7th, Frank Lampard. Steven Gerrard was a better midfielder and a better all-rounder, in my view, than Frank Lampard. Nonetheless, I think that Lampard is arguably the greater Premier League player. For a start, he played over 100 Premier League games more than Gerrard, 609 to Gerrard's 504, which is the equivalent of over 2.5 whole seasons. In fact, that right there is the biggest reason. But I also feel most of Lampard's big moments did come in the Premier League. He scored a ridiculous number of goals, ostensibly from midfield, 177 in total, and he powered Chelsea to 3 Premier League titles, enjoying sensational seasons on all 3 occasions. One could quite reasonably make the argument that in 2004-05, 2005-06, and 2009-10, those 3 title-winning campaigns, Lampard was Chelsea's star man. He scored 51 goals and made 41 assists over those 3 seasons alone, which adds up to a total of 92 goal contributions in only 109 appearances during that time. Remarkable output, and enough to earn Lampard a spot in 7th. 6th, Alan Shearer. Talking of output, Alan Shearer remains the highest goal scorer of the Premier League era, with his 260 Premier League goal haul safeguarded by Harry Kane's move to Bayern Munich. Meanwhile, he ranks 5th in the all-time English top-flight scorers charts, trailing only Jimmy Greaves, Steve Bloomer, Dixie Dean, and Gordon Hodgson. Shearer scored 23 goals in the old First Division for Southampton before the breakaway of the Premier League, which happened during the same season that he signed for Blackburn Rovers. Shearer never played for what we now call the Big Six, or previously the top 4. He twice rejected Manchester United, though he did of course manage to win a Premier League title at Blackburn in 1995. Shearer was at his quickest, most incisive, and most prolific while he was playing at Ewood Park, scoring what was, before Erling Haaland, a joint record 34 goals in the 94-95 season, tied with Andy Cole. At his boyhood club Newcastle, who Shearer joined for a British record fee in 1996, he continued to score at a fantastic rate, even when the Magpies were in the bottom half of the Premier League table. Often described as an old-school English number 9, Shearer was tough and aggressive, brilliant in the air, and he could score virtually every type of goal, both from within and outside of the box. His longevity, consistency, ability, and sheer level of output dictate that there can't be many players ahead of him in a purely Premier League context. 5th, Paul Scholes. The last of the fabled 3, endlessly and quite frankly tediously compared by virtue of being similar ages and all playing in midfield, and being English. For me, Paul Scholes does have a slightly superior Premier League legacy than Frank Lampard or Steven Gerrard. Possibly the most technically gifted midfielder that the league has ever seen, and certainly the most gifted Englishman, Scholes' touch, technique, and both weight and accuracy of pass were superior to any of his peers. Initially a striker, right up to the early to mid-2000s, Scholes often played just off a striker, most notably Ruud van Nistelrooy, occupying really advanced positions and running beyond him, and scoring plenty of goals as a result. It was following Roy Keane's departure, however, Scholes' retirement from international football, and his willingness and ability to make lung-busting runs beginning to wane, that he actually became even more important to Manchester United, dropping a little bit deeper, dictating the tempo of games, and turning the Premier League into his playground. It is true to say that Gerrard was more important to Liverpool than Scholes was to Manchester United, or that Frank Lampard scored more Premier League goals and played more games, but it's also true that Scholes made 499 Premier League appearances, he won 11 Premier League titles, which is the second most that any player has won, and his performance levels for 18 whole years, 19 if you include his comeback, in 2 or even 3 different midfield roles were absolutely out of this world. So he takes 5th. 4th, Patrick Vieira. I've no doubt that it will be controversial to put Patrick Vieira ahead of all 3 of Gerrard, Lampard and Scholes, not least because he made fewer Premier League appearances than all of them, putting him at an immediate disadvantage. With that being said, in a Premier League context, I don't think that many players have had more impact than Patrick Vieira. At a time when the Premier League loved a box-to-box midfielder, a Frenchman, born in Senegal, who arrived at Arsenal via AC Milan where he had barely played, immediately became the benchmark for box-to-box midfielders in English football. Vieira had absolutely everything. He is 6 foot 4 inches tall, at least 5 feet of which always appeared to be his legs, allowing him to gallop past opponents as though they weren't there in possession, and hunt them down out of possession, eating up ground as though it were nothing, before inexplicably wrapping his legs around the ball and stealing it from them. Vieira joined an Arsenal team, actually before Arsene Wenger, but knowing that his arrival was imminent, which had finished 5th the previous season and was built on a very solid defensive foundation, but was a little bit lacking in drive and creativity. Vieira lifted the whole club, like Bergkamp, but he was even more transformative. For the next 9 years, Vieira was the driving force in Arsenal's midfield, combining pace, power and stamina with tremendous vision, an ability to carry the ball and with him, the entire team up the pitch, and a directness in his passing and in his running, which made him borderline unplayable. He was also a brilliant captain who won 3 Premier League titles and made the PFA Team of the Year in 6 out of his 9 seasons in England, and quite frankly, it could easily have been all 9. 3rd, Wayne Rooney. It's easy to understand why Andy Cole or even Patrick Vieira might not be fully appreciated, but I really don't get it with Wayne Rooney. One of the 2 most exciting players that I think the Premier League has probably ever seen, along with one player who is still to come, when Rooney first broke through at Everton and subsequently signed for Manchester United at the age of only 18, he was like something from a different planet. At the age of 16, he was already built like a 25-year-old, and I don't mean a 25-year-old human, but a 25-year-old ox. Oh, hang on. Actually, it would seem that the average life expectancy of a musk ox is only 12 to 20 years, so I have effectively just compared a teenage Wayne Rooney to the rotten corpse of a hoofed mammal, so sorry about that, but I hope that you all understood the sentiment. Rooney was electric, never dull, and frequently magical. From 16 to 20, he was the best player in the world at his age, and that includes Cristiano Ronaldo. Of course, Rooney's lifestyle was a little bit different to Ronaldo's, and the latter's career would reach greater heights than his, but by the same token, Rooney would still become his club and country's all-time leading goalscorer, despite being renowned for his all-round game, actively lobbying managers not to play him as a number 9, and routinely sacrificing his own game for the benefit of the team and of others. Rooney may have declined a little bit earlier than some, but he broke through so young that he still made 491 Premier League appearances, he scored 208 Premier League goals, and made 103 Premier League assists, winning 5 Premier League titles, and he was just absolutely bloody brilliant for ages before his decline. 2nd, Roy Keane. I have little doubt that Roy Keane's spot in 2nd will spark some debate in the comments, as it should. It is a game of opinions after all, but I'll address it right off the bat. There is a misconception among people with poor memories or who just didn't get to watch him play that Roy Keane was a hard man. Ironically, I think that is maybe the only aspect of Keane's game that is actually overrated. In reality, Keane was uncompromising in the tackle, he had a fierce drive and will to win, and he was an excellent captain. But he was also so much more than that. Just take his passing. Keane's range of passing might not have been as varied or as easy on the eye as Paul Scholes', but it was just as, if not, at times, even more effective. Everyone who played with Keane will tell you that they were shocked the first time that they trained with him, not because he smashed them, but because of the quality of his first touch, the speed of his awareness, and the efficiency with which he moved the ball. Wayne Rooney stated, quote, "The thing that surprised me with Roy was his passing into a forward's feet. He was the best I've ever played with, getting the ball into the forwards." End quote. Rooney, of course, also played with Gerrard, Lampard and Scholes, among a great many others. From Eric Cantona's retirement in 1997 at least, for the next 8 years, Keane was the most important player at Manchester United, who were the best team in England at the time, the first name on the team sheet, and between an 8 and a 10 out of 10 virtually every week. In total, he made 366 Premier League appearances, starring for 2 seasons at Nottingham Forest in the First Division. He won 7 Premier League titles and, aside possibly from Cantona, and even that is debatable, I don't think that any player was more important than Keane in Manchester United becoming the dominant force in English football. First, Thierry Henry. As predictable as it is correct, Thierry Henry is the greatest player of the Premier League era. Signed from Juventus, where he had been forced to play as a wing-back, Henry didn't hit the ground running immediately at Arsenal, but once he got started, he never stopped. Lightning quick, brilliant on the ball, and devastating in terms of both goal scoring and goal creation in the final third, there was an aura about Henry, and a fear that he struck into the hearts of defenders, which hasn't really been replicated by a Premier League forward, either before or since. Maybe Ronaldo, but I still think not quite to the same iconic extent. Despite the fact that he liked to drift out wide to the left flank and was such a powerful creative force, no one in the so-called Premier League 100 club has a better Premier League goals-to-game ratio than Henry, who struck 175 times, as well as making 74 assists in 258 Premier League appearances. That is a goal contribution every game almost, over 250 games spanning 8 years. During those 8 years, Henry won 2 Premier League titles, 4 Premier League Golden Boots, and he made 6 PFA Team of the Year appearances. It wouldn't be accurate to say that no one comes close, but equally, it felt like quite an easy decision to pick my top spot. So that is my 1 through to 22, which absolutely everyone is guaranteed to hate. If I wanted an easy life, I probably would have ordered them something more like Henry, Shearer, Rooney, Gerrard, Lampard, Scholes, Vieira, Keane, Aguero, Cantona, Terry, Ashley Cole, Schmeichel, Ferdinand, Bergkamp, Cech, Drogba, Kompany, Andy Cole, Beckham, Adams, and then Wright. I think that is the order that probably would build the most consensus and draw the least ire in the comments, but I also think that it would be more wrong, and, who wants an easy life anyway? That would be boring. Anyhow, it is a game of opinions, now you've heard mine, but let me know yours down below in the comments, and which players you feel should be added to the Premier League Hall of Fame that no one cares about. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it or found it remotely interesting. And make sure that you're subscribed, of course, and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my brilliant, as critics are describing it, second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and sometimes just on the street loitering about. Via the video description below, except for the last one. You'll have to stalk me for that. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.